What's going on, everyone? My name is Jason Vinson. Me and my wife Chasney run Vinson Images based out of Northwest Arkansas. And today I'm going to be going over exactly how I have my mirrorless camera set up to shoot weddings. So I get a lot of questions asking me about, custom buttons, how I shoot, certain settings that I use. And so I'm going to go over all of that with you today. The key is that I'm going to be going over my specific camera, which is the Sony A9. A lot of these settings will be universal for all mirrorless cameras, but I'm sure there are some that are going to be more specific to Sony cameras. So just keep that in mind as we're going through everything. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my camera to aperture priority. The majority of my day is spent shooting in aperture priority with auto ISO. If I'm shooting flash, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to be set to manual. But the first thing I'm going to do, again, is set to aperture priority. And then I'm going to jump into the menu. Now, most of the settings that are in here are going to be set to default. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to step through the main ones that I have customized. Okay, and so the first one is going to be on camera 1, page 3. And it's going to be register custom shoot set. Now, this will all make more sense after we go through everything. But the first thing I'm going to do is recall custom hold 1. And then I'm going to have a check mark next to shoot mode. And you'll see it set to aperture priority. My aperture is set to f1.4, and then nothing else is checked until I get to ISO, and I have ISO set to auto. My metering mode is multi, and AF on is set to off. I could just as easily have just had the check mark unchecked. Okay, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to recall custom hold 2. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to have focus mode set to continuous AF. And the focus area is going to be flexible spot. And for this one, I have it set to flexible spot M, which is medium sized. And then AF on, I have set to on. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to go over here to page 4. And I'm going to set my focus area to tracking flexible spot S. Next one is going to be page 5. I have AF with shutter set to off. Basically, this is back button focus. If you're not familiar, it just, whenever you half press the shutter and it engages autofocus, it just turns that off. And instead, I have a button on the back of my camera set to turn autofocus on and off. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to page 8. And I'm going to go down to ISO settings. ISO is going to be 100. ISO I'm going to set to auto. Because again, I'm just setting this up to how I normally shoot the day. So ISO auto, ISO range is going to be 100 to 12,000 or 128,000. And then ISO auto minimum shutter speed is going to be 1/250th of a second. What this does is it makes it so that the shutter can't drop below 1/250th of a second. If it does need to go below 1/250th, it's going to raise the ISO for me. Okay, so I know no matter how I'm shooting, what situation I'm shooting in, my shutter speed is always going to be 1/250th or higher. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is go to page 11. And white balance I'm going to have set to auto. Then I'm going to go to page 2, or camera 2, page 5. Okay, now there's two things I'm going to do here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have mechanical shutter set as my shutter type. And then E-front curtain I'm going to select as on. And then I'm going to select the shutter again, and I'm going to go down to electronic. The reason why I'm doing this is because I want my electronic shutter to be engaged, but just in case I switch over to mechanical, I want to have that E front curtain set to on. If I have the electronic set to or if I have the shutter set to electronic, you'll see that E front curtain is grayed out, so I can't actually adjust it. So that's why I had to set it to mechanical first. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to page 7. And for the display button, this is just personal preference, but under monitor, I have display all info and then no display info. And that's the only thing I have selected. And then for finder, I just have no display info. That's the only option. And what this does is I either have nothing shown on my screen or I have everything shown on my screen, and there's no in between. So it's either see everything or don't see anything, okay? The next step is going to be setting up our custom buttons, which is going to be page 9. So custom key. For 1, which is the wheel on the back of the camera, I have set to exposure compensation. What this does is it allows me to adjust my exposure compensation. Most of the time, I'm just using this wheel up at the top. You'll see how that adjusts my exposure. But if for some reason I need to go higher or lower than ±3, which is all that's on this dial, I can set it to 0 on the dial, and now on the back of the wheel I have ±5. Okay, so it just gives me a little bit more flexibility, but I don't always need it. And so having it set to say -5 on here, the instant I adjust this wheel up here always overrides what's on here. So this gives this wheel a little bit of use, but it's not something that I can bump into constantly and mess things up. Okay, so going back into custom keys, I have button 2, which is this AEL button, set to recall custom hold 2. I have AF on to my AF on button. I have recall custom hold 1 set to this C3 button. And then for button 5 down here, C4, I have set to wireless flash. So let me explain what we did here earlier when we were setting up these custom holds. Most of the time during the day, I'm using this AF on button. And what this does when we set it to AF tracking, it makes it so I can focus on something and it'll track it throughout the screen no matter where that subject goes on the screen. Okay? But sometimes I don't want to have to track something. I just want AFC to work how it normally does on like a DSLR. And so that's where this AEL button comes in. Now, wherever I have my focus point, that's the only thing that's in focus. And so if I move over here, then the focus shifts. Move back, and the focus shifts. And it's only focusing wherever I have that focus point pointed to. Okay? So that's what this custom hold button does. The other custom hold button, what this is for is if I'm shooting in manual mode, and I'm going to go ahead and put this ISO back to 100. For some reason, say I'm at ISO 100 at 5.6, 1/250th of a second, this would be the exposure I'm getting. So this would be something if I'm using off-camera flash or really just whenever I'm using off-camera flash. If for some reason something's going on, instead of having to switch my dial, adjust my ISO, adjust my aperture, any of that stuff, all I have to do is push C3 and that automatically switches me to my lowest aperture. I had it set to 1.4, but this lens only does 1.8, so it automatically goes to 1.8. Aperture priority, auto ISO, 1/250th of a second. And then from there, I can focus and take my picture. Whenever I let go of this button, my settings revert back to where they were, and I can go back to shooting flash however I wanted. Okay, so push and hold, aperture priority, let go, back to manual. The thing to keep in mind is that this focus button won't work in conjunction with this because they're both custom hold buttons. You can only use one at a time, so I can only use the AF on for focusing in this situation. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and set my ISO back to auto how I had it. And then I'm going to go to back to aperture priority and we'll continue back where we were. So custom settings, I'm going to go to page 2 now. So focus standard, this just gives me my wheel or my little thumb track so I can adjust my focus point and I can center click it to get it back to the center. 2, the front button I have set to not set. 3, I have audio signals. 4, I have ISO. And then 5, I have auto white balance lock toggle. Okay, and then on page 3, I have shutter type, which is this top button up here. And then for 2, I have ISO auto minimum shutter speed, which is the second button up here at the top. So let me explain those two real quick. Whenever I'm shooting aperture priority, auto ISO, and I have my minimum shutter speed set to 1/250th, sometimes there's situations where I'm shooting a portrait and it's really low light, no one's moving. And so what I can do is I can still shoot aperture priority how I would like to be shooting, but I can set my minimum shutter speed to something lower, knowing that my in-body image stabilization will be able to handle things as far as camera shake as long as my subjects aren't moving. So there's times where I'll shoot at 1/4 of a second or 1/8 of a second and be totally fine. And this just gives me the flexibility without having to switch over to manual and readjust all my settings, okay? And so that's this button. Whenever I push it, I'm able to reset my minimum shutter speed to whatever I want it to be, okay? And then C1 is just my shutter type, so I can go in between electronic shutter, mechanical shutter. And then audio signals I have set to off. This is just because the A9 has an electronic shutter, so everything's silent. But sometimes when you're shooting portraits and you're up close and it's kind of, you want to give the subjects that audio feedback that you're taking pictures, I'll set the audio signals to on so that it makes like a clicking noise even though I'm using the electronic shutter. And this just gives the subjects feedback that I'm taking pictures and not just standing there, okay? So going back in here, so all the custom keys are now set. The next thing is going to be, I'm going to come up to the toolbox and I'm going to go to page 6 and record media settings. I just have it set to write raw files to both slot 1 and slot 2 as a backup. And then I also have the folder name set to date form. What this does is every single day, all the images will be a separate folder. And so if I have a shoot on Monday and a shoot on Tuesday and then a shoot on Wednesday, and I don't format my card or have time to upload or things like that, all those images for the different shoots are separated into different folders, and it just makes it easier for me to organize. Okay. And then the last thing I have is going to be the star menu up here, and it's just quick access menu for format and finder monitor. Format is just so I don't have to dig through the menu to format my memory cards. Okay, so finder monitor just allows me to adjust on whether the sensor automatically chooses between viewfinder and monitor, or if I can say, hey, only show me the viewfinder or only show me the monitor. Okay, so it just gives me a little bit of flexibility if for some reason the sensor's not working right, or if I'm in a situation where the sensor's getting tripped and I don't want it to be tripped. Okay, so I'm gonna go menu, memory, 1, and now it's registered. Okay, so the reason why I do that is for two very important reasons. Whenever I go to between manual and aperture priority, you'll see now I'm in manual up here at the top, but I still have auto ISO set with my 1/250th of a second. So if I'm shooting flash, I have to go into the ISO settings and set my ISO to 100, and then I can adjust my shutter speed to whatever I want. Now, for some reason, I go back to A. I'm still at ISO 100. I'm at the shutter speed that I set, so I'd have to go back into here and I'd have to say, you know what, go back to auto ISO. And so it's just a lot of jumping around whenever I'm switching between manual and aperture priority. But if I'm in manual and I set to 100 and I set my shutter speed to something like whatever, 1/8,000th of a second, if I go to 1, it automatically pulls up all of my settings. I don't have to adjust my ISO. I don't have to adjust anything. If I go back to manual, it automatically pulls back the settings that I was last using in manual. So I don't have to do all this jumping back and forth between setting my ISOs and stuff. The next thing I'm going to do in here is I'm actually going to go into manual. I'm going to set my shutter to mechanical. And then I'm also going to set E-front curtain to off. Now the reason why I do this is because while I'm shooting manual and I'm shooting flash, a lot of the times I'm using high-speed sync. And there's this super funky thing that happens when you're shooting high-speed sync with mechanical shutter and the electronic front curtain set to on, and you'll get this weird banding if you go way up on your shutter speed, so like 1/8,000th of a second. And so in order to negate that, I just have that electronic front curtain set to off. But you'll notice now that I'm in manual, okay, I have mechanical shutter, I have E-front curtain set to off. If I go to back to 1, how I normally shoot, and I go menu, you'll see electronic front curtain is automatically set, and that's grayed out. But if for some reason while I'm in 1, I want to go to mechanical, that E-front curtain is set back to on. So I don't have to dive into the menus to turn these things back and forth. Okay. All right, so there you have it. That's how I have my camera set up to shoot weddings. If you have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments. I know I kind of glossed over a lot of stuff that's in that menu, and that's mostly because I shoot it as default. But if there's something I didn't cover that you have a question about, again, just leave them in the comments. I'd also love if you went ahead and look me up on Instagram, hit that follow button, and hopefully I'll be cranking out some more content for you guys. All right, catch you later.